Look, Lebanon is a deeply problematically governed state, and it has been for a number of years. The sectarian makeup of Lebanon, where you have 18 different sects or factions which share power in a very complicated arrangement, is almost a recipe for government paralysis. It's succeeded, in keeping the internal peace in Lebanon since the Lebanese civil war, but it's drastically failed its people in terms of the quality of its governance. And I think, this explosion at the port was really the product of a series of government failures. It had been, cargo on a ship that was seized in 2013 and had just been left to sit idle by the port, despite port authorities and customs authorities saying, please fix this. So I think that the thing to watch now, of course, is just which political faction in Lebanon emerges stronger from this, which ones emerge weaker. Will the public outcry, and there have been many of these in Lebanon over the years, lead to any change, or is it going to be the status quo? It's needless to say, it's an awful tragedy for the people of Lebanon and all the victims, including the young Australian boy that was killed.
What's Hezbollah's role in all of this, if at all, Dave?
Well, they have to, I think, take a significant share of the responsibility. Hezbollah is part of the national government and part of the national institutions. I know that spiritual leader of Hezbollah was out over the weekend saying this has nothing to do with Hezbollah. But I think, it's a case of a curse on all your houses. Hezbollah is implicated, but some of the other different factions that are represented within the Lebanese government. All the national political leadership in Lebanon has to carry the blame for this, and all of them have to be held accountable to the people. What do we do?
The Prime Minister has announced $5 million worth of aid that Australia will be sending. It had announced $2 million last week, so it's kind of upped that. But how can you be certain that your money is being used correctly when it is being sent to a corrupt government?
Well, for us, and we are very careful with these things, we channel all of that aid, and we will be with this through international institutions, multilateral institutions like the World Food Programme, like UNICEF, the UN Children's Fund, like the Food and Agricultural Organisation, because that allows the same sort of probity and accountability and transparency and receipt keeping and everything else to apply to that money. So it's not going as a blank cheque to the government of Lebanon. It's not to be spent by Hezbollah or other factions. It will be delivered to the people. But look, I think this is a humanitarian gesture, and I think it's an important one. But some of the the problems that underlie this are deeply political and much less amenable to outside assistance. It's not going to fix Lebanon's political system. It'll help the population through this, but the failings here are really ones of Lebanon's political system.
Just want to get your thoughts on Hong Kong. Australia and 4 allies, Dave, have urged Hong Kong government to allow barred opposition candidates to contest delayed parliamentary elections. What's your thoughts on this intervention?
Well, I think it's important that we and other countries continue to speak out in favour of the Sino-British Declaration, which underpins Hong Kong's unique status, one country, two systems. When that was signed and concluded and it operates until 2047, it was always envisaged that Hong Kong would continue to have its own internal governance and accountable elections and whatnot. And the fact that they've delayed the elections by a year, but also barred 12 pro-democracy candidates from running again, I think is deeply troubling. It suggests that agreement is not being honoured. And obviously, the imposition of the basic security law by mainland authorities was a further step in that regard. Yeah. But I think it's attempts by China to change the status quo in Hong Kong, which we do need to continue to speak out against.
Yeah, the official lines were, the disqualification of candidates, the year-long postponement. Carrie Lam, the chief executive, says it's because of coronavirus. Are you buying that?
No, I'm not. And look, I'd be concerned about any, I think, government that postpones elections of this sort of significance pointing to health concerns. There have been other, talks about this in a number of countries around the world, and I think we should always oppose them. The world needs to carry on, and we still need to allow people to have their say over the choice of government they've got. But also, more importantly, it can't be used as a cloak by people who are fundamentally opposed to democracy to try and subvert the will of the people.
Is this kind of intervention, this letter that was written this morning, is that going to irritate China? It's kind of in a perpetual state of irritation, I suppose, at the moment.
I'm sure it will irritate China. But I think this is a case of us needing to speak out for our values and our interests and what is right. I think it's been done in a respectful way, but clearly this is an area of policy where we have a substantially different view to China. And I think it's important we do speak out on that. We shouldn't be pulling punches just because one country might not agree with our policy position.
Yeah, OK, just finally, Dave, on to Kylie Moore-Gilbert, the Australian academic who is imprisoned in Iran now for almost 2 years. There had been some intervention by her friends in the last couple of weeks, and some of them appeared on this show to talk about Kylie Moore-Gilbert. But the government has now said, no, we have met, or we are in the process of trying to meet with her at Karchek prison. So let's proceed with quiet diplomacy. But do you think that that's working?
Well, I think it's a very difficult situation for Kylie Moore-Gilbert and for her family and her friends and her supporters. I know our ambassador did meet with her over, I think it was a couple of days ago now, in Karchak prison and visited on her and reported back on her welfare, and I'm pleased she was given access. But look, Kylie's now 2 years into what's ostensibly a 10-year sentence that was handed down in deeply non-transparent sort of conditions. So I think everyone is right to be concerned about this. Obviously, as a foreign government, we don't have direct influence over the Iranian judiciary or their legal system, and so we do have to rely upon diplomatic channels and often quiet diplomatic channels to achieve what we hope to achieve. But I can understand family and friends and colleagues and whatnot of Kylie are feeling frustrated by this process, undoubtedly.
So which is the best way? Which is the best way forward?
Well, look, there's no sort of one-size-fits-all approach here, but I think it's important when the government's dealing with this that they speak carefully and they carry out things discreetly, because often more publicity in these cases doesn't help. But that's a little different, I think, from her family or her friends or her colleagues wishing to speak out on her behalf. I mean, I think it's natural. I think that Australians are deeply interested and deeply concerned in the fate and in the welfare of Dr. Kylie Moore-Gilbert. And look, we're a free society, we're a tolerant society. We allow people to express their views, and this is really what her colleagues are doing here with their Facebook page and their Twitter feed and their website. I think they're making known not only to their fellow Australians, but to people worldwide how much they're concerned about Kylie's welfare and her mental health and her mental well-being.